Congressman, most active duty military members vote by mail. Of course, you represent a rather rural area. Do you trust the U.S. Post Service to deliver ballots quickly and reliably?
I do. There's a federal law in place, and it actually has been in place for a long time. Matter of fact, my first vote in 1980 for Ronald Reagan, I was actually in 29 Palms, California, voting by mail. And there's a process. The federal law requires timely sending out of the ballots 45 days prior. The state of Illinois had always done that before and always got their mail-in ballots in by election day. So they didn't change this law until 2005. Well, it was actually carried in 2005. It was the next election cycle that it was carried. So yes, I do trust them to do it just the same way all the other states do.
So, well, and a lot of states have expanded mail-in balloting over the years. Some states do mail-in balloting exclusively. If a service member mails a ballot on election day, but it arrives a day or two late because of delays in the mail, shouldn't that vote count?
And it will be counted. Let me tell you what the Illinois law says, though. It says that there are 14 days that they can count ballots even if they do not have a post date prior to or the day of the election. That is the problem with the Illinois law. It's not that we don't, if they count them, they can set it and say that they can count, but it has to have a post date. And what's really wild is and understand the Supreme Court case, the Supreme Court case is not the case itself. It was because the lower courts made the decision and made the statement that I did not have standing. What the Supreme Court ruling was 7-2 that I do have standing. As a candidate, I have standing.
Right. You didn't necessarily win the argument just yet, but you have the right to make the argument.
Now I have the right to make the argument. That is correct.
Right. You've said that election day should mean election day. Are you
election day means the election day by law.
I understand that, but are you comfortable telling a deployed soldier that their vote does not count because the mail moved too slowly?
I'm not telling a deployed soldier that his or her vote does not count. I'm telling them that there's a process by which you get your vote in, and your vote definitely counts. And I just told you, my vote definitely counted in 1980, before this law existed. And I thank heaven it did. And I want to make sure that all of our veterans have the right to vote. And this bill, if we get rid of this law, it will go back to what it was before. That's the problem, is the state of Illinois, and that's where the argument is. They're not exactly telling the truth. And even before the Supreme Court, Brown Jackson asked the attorney for the state, well, they have to be dated, correct, on a post stamp. And she said, well, yes, and that's not true. That's not what the law says. The law says that they don't have to be, and they can count up to 14 days. We are very clear in this United States that election day, and that is our argument before the courts, election day, according to law, according to the Constitution, is the first Tuesday after the first Monday of November of every even year. That's election day.
Right, but I guess I'm getting confused with hearing what you're saying in this conversation with me now and reading what your lawyers write in the legal briefings, because there you say that it harms you and your campaign if your poll workers have to stay back and monitor the ballots as they come in up to those 2 weeks after.
Yes. So do you want to know why it harms me in my campaign? Because, and this is the argument, why it harms me in the campaign. Because if you do not count them on time, and they can draw it out, and these are not post-dated, then it harms me in a collection of votes that were not cast in the manner that they were supposed to be cast by the election day.
Well, but they were cast in the mail on or before election day. They were just
that's not what the law says.
They were counted in the days after. How long is too long? Is 2 weeks too long?
Anything past, they can count them. They can count them. They just can't count and have them not post-dated. They have to be voted on by election day. The law says they don't have to be voted on by election day. They can be, as long as they get them within 14 days. And there's no way to tell when they made that vote. That's the problem.
Let's sum this part of it up, because I have other questions I do want to ask you. If the courts ultimately uphold the current system, will you accept that outcome as legitimate?
That's exactly the way this process works. I don't like it. And I think if they rule in another direction, I think they would be wrong in their ruling. But that's the way this process works. And I think what the greatest part of what happened in the Supreme Court, time and time again, the lower courts have told candidates who are suing over issues like this that they didn't have standing. Now those lawsuits can move forward, and I've talked to many people over the last day and a half that have thanked me for moving forward with this because they had cases in their states that a lower judge said, well, you don't really have standing. And this is shown in their opinion that we do have standing as candidates.
All right, we've been talking about elections and process. Let's shift a little bit to the work of Congress and the consequences that stem from it, specifically as it pertains to affordability. Thousands of Americans who live and work in your district get their health insurance coverage through the Affordable Care Act. How do you explain your vote to them that raises their out-of-pocket?
I'm really glad you asked that, because it actually affects about 7% of the votes. Because why? Because Obamacare failed. It has failed, and the only way we've kept it going was during pandemic. We actually are paying billions of dollars to insurance companies to keep it going. We carried a bill at the end of the last year, before this other one was tried to be moved through the procedural moves, that actually had changes to the system that even the CBO score said that it would save customers about 11% across the board on their insurance costs. The Democrats all voted against that. So why in the world would I want to argue and explain to my taxpayers that I want to take their tax dollars to reduce someone else's insurance cost when the system is fundamentally broken and the taxpayers will be on the hook to the insurance companies for years and years, instead of being wise enough to fix the problem that was created by Obamacare that we told people it would create? Everything about Obamacare has been a lie. Everything. You can't keep your doctor. They said that your rates would go down. This proves your rates don't go down. And so let's get the real problem fixed and work on it that way. So I feel very comfortable with my vote. I've also talked with a lot of my constituents, and when I can explain it to them, they understand that and why it is I took that vote.
I want to make sure I understand where you're coming from. Are you saying that because so few of your constituents, just 7%, a minority of voters in your district, are affected, that you can live with raising their premiums by such a large amount?
I can tell you that I'm going to be working, and I made a vote to reduce their premiums by 11%, even before this bill came into the floor.
But it didn't take effect.
I will tell them that as taxpayers, they should be concerned for their children and grandchildren as well, for the debt that we're to continue to support a program that doesn't work, that we're going to have to work on even if we pass this bill and it passes the Senate. And it passed the House. It didn't pass with my vote.
These are thousands of your constituents who are trying to make rent this month. What do you tell them now?
That we will continue to work to try to fix the problem on the insurance and fix it correctly. And that is what I will tell them. And I will also tell them, and we'll do it at a better cost to them as taxpayers.
All right, we look forward to seeing that debate take place. I want to shift gears a little bit south of our border. What legitimate claim does America have to Venezuelan oil?
Because the companies, before the regime took over, the companies were not, they were private companies, many of them American companies as well. And because of what happened, where they're also providing a lot of oil that they were selling to our enemies. So, and when the embargo, they were sanctioned, and that oil has been embargoed, and no one was enforcing it, and now we're enforcing that.
I thought President Trump opposed regime change. What's his policy?
Well, you'd have to ask President Trump that. I believe what he did in this case was went after a criminal who has been charged in our courts, and this has been done before by other presidents, and that's exactly the way we handled it.
You can think of Panama and Noriega under President Bush. Let's shift back closer to home, though. President Trump's own chief of staff, Susie Wiles, said that he should have been more selective in issuing broad blanket pardons to January 6 rioters. Some of those convicts who were pardoned have since been charged with new violent crimes. Would you have pardoned every one of them?
So I don't have that power with my position. I don't agree with every pardon. Matter of fact, I did not agree with Rod Blagojevich being pardoned. But the president has that power. I've never questioned that power. But if you want to really talk about pardons that are pretty scary, it's the ones that are done with the electronic pen and not the president signing them himself.
You're referring to President Biden, though I think he was quite engaged in the idea of pardons that went to members of his family or political allies of his. Of course, he was making the case that he was fearing political retribution at the time.
And you know what? Our forefathers gave that power to our president. And many presidents have used it, and many presidents, people that were on the other side of whoever they might have been pardoning, feel like that maybe the president shouldn't have done that. But it is a power that we can question it, but it's still a power that's going to remain in the hands of the president.
Let's talk about the powers of the president and the propriety of its exercise. More than 8 in 10 Americans say they've seen the video of an ICE officer shooting Renee Good, an American citizen, and a mother in her car. According to pollsters at Quinnipiac, only about 1/3 of Americans think that shooting was justified.
Well,
you were a first responder. If that was you in the ICE officer's shoes, would you have done anything differently?
I was not in his shoes, and let me tell you that case law has proven out that a vehicle is a weapon, and if that weapon is being used, which I believe some of the tapes actually show how she was, well, actually she did hit him. She did hit him.
That's in dispute.
This same officer, if you know and studied this, was drugged just a few weeks ago by a vehicle.
After breaking through the window of that vehicle.
No, not on his case. No, that was on a different case. He was drugged, and what is happening is many of these groups are using these vehicles to impede federal law enforcement from doing their jobs, and that's exactly what she was doing. So if you play the video
tires were pointed away from the scene, and I think that any good defense attorney would advocate in court that she was trying to flee the scene. I don't know what legal authority even local police officers have to open fire on someone who's leaving a scene.
He had that vehicle coming at him and had hit him by the time he pulled the trigger, if you study those videos, as we have done here.
So if you've looked at those videos, you've seen that he was wearing a mask to start. He was holding a cell phone in one hand, a gun in the other, then switching hands between
No, that gun never came out until he was hit.
If I can. Then he was positioning his body in front of her car at the first, then moving to the side when he opened fire at her. Again, you talk to police officers, peace officers, they would tell you any number of those things were inappropriate ways for a police officer to comport themselves.
I've talked to police officers who disagree with you, and let me tell you why. First off, one thing you said, and that's a problem. It's vitally important that your reporting is correct. He had a cell phone in one hand and a holstered gun. Until the car was coming at him and had hit him, the gun did not come out of the holster. The car was being used as a weapon. It doesn't matter how you try to spin it. It was being used as a weapon. This is a case law that has happened over and over with officers, knowing that some people, unfortunately, try to use their vehicle as a weapon, and therefore the rule that the officers are taught, and I've talked to officers about this, that it is considered a weapon, and it has proven out in court and in investigations.
Well, sure, a vehicle can be deemed a weapon. I think a lot of the circumstances matter in terms of direction and intent and motive and what leads up to it. Let's zoom out just a little bit here.
Okay.
President Trump is threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act just today and to deploy active duty American military into the streets of Minneapolis. Is deploying active duty military against domestic protesters a wise use of presidential power in this, the land of the free?
It wouldn't be the first time it's had been used. I know you're a little younger than me, but in 1969, They were during the riots of the race riots and also the riots over the Vietnam War. Troops were deployed because that is sometimes when that happens. When we're looking at the videos coming out of Minneapolis or out of Minnesota at this time, and the governor, who I know well, is refusing to follow federal law and allow federal agents to do what federal agents need to do, and encouraging people to resist federal law enforcement, then that is a problem. And how the president handles it, he has those powers, and we will watch and see what he does with it.
Vice President Vance said this week that ICE agents will be going door to door. Can you think of anything in the Bill of Rights that might suggest that's not allowed?
Sure. I can tell you why they can go door to door, because they're going door to door to locate these people who are here illegally, that have been known to commit many crimes, which they explain on a regular basis, that include criminal sexual assault, rape, robbery, murder in some cases, and were active with gangs before they got here, many of those. And matter of fact, in the state of Illinois, there was now the guy that's running for one of the congressional seats, who is a mayor, I think, of the town of Evanston. He confronted the ICE agents, the head ICE agent that was there, and said he didn't want him in his city. And he said, "You do know," and he gave a list of the crimes of people that they were looking for. And as he was looking for them, the mayor said, "Well, I didn't know they were here." He said, "You're the mayor. That's why we're trying to tell you they're here." So going door to door is not an uncommon practice when looking for criminals.
Well, I mean, a person's home is the most sacred, protected space in constitutional law. The Fourth Amendment protects our privacy. The Fifth Amendment protects our life, liberty, and property.
You don't have to quote the Constitution to me. I know it, but I'm telling you that when it is there's federal crime involved, there is a procedure that you can go to locate them door to door.
Then shouldn't they have a warrant?
If they have, we'll see how they handle it. We'll see how they handle it.
Okay. Quick political question before we let you go. We got a primary coming up in Illinois, a heated race for governor. Who do you like in the Republican primary?
I haven't endorsed anybody as of yet. I'm watching and looking at the candidates just like everybody else. There's some very good candidates there, and I will make that decision and probably tell people later on down the road. One
of those guys ran against you. You're considering voting for him?
If he is the Republican candidate, I will be voting for him, yes.
I'm asking about the primary.
We will weigh out who all is involved, and I'll weigh the candidate against each other. Just because he ran against me doesn't exclude him from me weighing out everybody, including him.
All right, Congressman Mike Bost.
All right, thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.